Ben, if you were the Humanitarian Coordinator in Rwanda in 1994, at the beginning of the Great Lakes tragedy, how did that experience affect you?
Well, you know, Key, in part, I had mentioned that I came in with this extraordinary confidence in the Humanitarian Coordinator. Why? Because basically, I mean, I hope people felt that they could get along with me, but at the same time that I could also be a useful guide given my experiences in the humanitarian sector. But as I also said, it took me a couple of weeks to realize that all my experience had relatively little relevance when you talk about not a crisis that I had ever encountered, and that is a crisis of a genocide. How do you, as ostensibly a humanitarian worker, deal with a society that has really been totally traumatized by having a vast percentage of the population eliminated in 3 or 4 months, and in ways which are just too horrific to think about? So on the one hand, I think it gave me a certain, dare I say, professional modesty. I think on the other hand, it gave me a certain sense that we as a system, or a sector, or a community, are really failing those whom we intend to serve because we are not actually appreciating the subtlety, the nuance, dare I say, the dynamics of peoples who we come in to help. And that really, I think, was a major lesson that came out of Rwanda. But also, if I may, that I think there were a couple of other things. And since you're concerned with leadership and leadership-related issues, one of the things that, if I look back on Rwanda, 2 or 3 things that, at least as I reflect on my own career, were very important from my perspective. And that is, we had a huge problem with the peacekeeping force in Rwanda. A very fine man, General Tusignan, but who really felt that he had to keep a hold over his troops, and for all intents and purposes that they were sort of isolated, which meant that the humanitarian sector and the peacekeeping sector were really divided. And I was very uncertain how we could get them together, and they had to be gotten together for a variety of reasons. On the one hand, the troops, the peacekeepers, were being used for assessments where it was clearly the role of the United Nations, so to speak, civilian forces. Variety of issues, variety of reasons just reinforced the need for me to bring these 2 sides together. And the way finally we did it was to develop an information sharing system and an operational information center in Kigali. And the point I'm making in this case is that I didn't lead this thing, but in a sense, what I was able to do is to persuade the force commander to work with us. Nothing, dare I say, that would in any way change the configuration of his forces, but just built upon the perceived need to exchange information, that we could work together. And he agreed. And in fact, the Operational Information Center, I believe, is something that was carried on and copied in other sort of emergency operations where there were peacekeeping forces thereafter. I guess in this sense, if one can call it leadership, it was an instinct to say, listen, try and identify the common problem, the common issue that could bring people together, and then see if one can resolve a more abiding issue and problem. So that's one thing that Rwanda meant for me. I think a second thing is, I was very unhappy for, not institutional reasons, but for, I think, common good reasons, that the NGOs at a certain point in the operations began to just feed information on a regional basis across, if you like, in between and amongst themselves, but never including us. And so I remember getting them together and saying, listen, why don't we establish something called the Integrated Regional Information Network? And we can all share information, and we can all let everyone do. And now and then, with that, and a woman named Pat Banks was my deputy, and after she was transferred, I was transferred. She then turned IRIN, into the extraordinary organization it is today. But the point here is that, again, a problem, and is there a solution, and how does one bring people together? And this was nothing coercive. There's no command and control. It was saying, listen, there are common needs. We've identified them. How can we actually find a solution? And dare I say, IRIN, in no small part, thanks to Pat Banks, became, I think, a solution, and I think something that I remember that came out of Rwanda. I think a third issue, if I'm not burning up too much tape, is the whole question of, I guess, what might be called, what really is our function? And here I don't think I succeeded well at all, but here I tried. And it began with the delivery of vehicles bought by UNDP for the operations, which, dare I say, I insisted on handing over to the, I guess it was the Ministry of, let's just call it rehabilitation. It wasn't, but it was something. And I was very proud to hand them over, but the thing that made me proudest was there were no UN stickers. There were no thanks to the United Nations, etc., this donation. Because I think the point of a traumatized society is, how do you rebuild self-respect, self-confidence? How do you overcome trauma? And one way is not to make donations, handouts, so extraordinarily obvious. Another aspect of the hapless victim. No. So what I really tried to do is to persuade people, you don't have to have a label when you give. You can actually give more sincerely, with greater effect, without the label. That was a totally failed experiment. I tried, and this was a leadership gone wrong. And basically, it didn't work, and dare I say, even the UNDP came down on me, and how dare you not have, etc. Anyway, that's the one I could resist, and I said, I'm not sure what I said, but we didn't have labels. But then again, everyone else did. So, another aspect of what I think is a kind of leadership situation, trying to, if you like, set standards, trying, if you like, to bring people together to understand the nature of a problem. And that, I think, is perhaps not get them over the parapet, fix bayonets. It's a different kind of leadership.